From clamoring for selfies to flying those now familiar flags.
For the last 9 years, I cannot recall he did anything good for the country.
Get rid of Trudeau, get rid of the Liberals, and we'll be good.
Many Canadians anticipated Justin Trudeau's decision to resign, although during his tenure, he implemented progressive policies that affected climate change, gender equality, and Indigenous rights. Yet, despite these accomplishments, Trudeau's popularity had declined for months, caused by dissatisfaction with rising inflation, housing affordability issues, and contentious policies like the carbon tax. As we move forward, I'd like to ask you a quick favor to subscribe and like this video. It takes just a second and helps us so much. What followed Trudeau's resignation was something far darker. Instead of a period of reflection and a graceful exit from the public eye, Trudeau found himself at the center of a deeply unsettling chapter. A series of violent death threats.
It's affecting your thinking, not exposing yourself to the public more broadly.
On the contrary, I'm continuing to be out there to meet with Canadians, to talk with them about their concerns, and I will continue to do that.
Within Canada, political figures, media outlets, and the public expressed shock, but there was also a hint of concern for the safety of all political leaders. On the international stage, leaders from around the globe, including French President Emmanuel Macron and outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden, expressed their solidarity with Trudeau, condemning the violence and highlighting the threats to democratic processes that such hostility represents. At first, the threats appeared to be typical for a politician of his stature. Vague, anonymous warnings that hinted at the potential for harm. However, it didn't take long for these messages to grow darker and more specific. Some of the threats were explicit and graphic, referencing Trudeau's controversial policies with disturbing detail. The very nature of these threats made it impossible for him to carry on his life as he had before. Security around Trudeau and his family was significantly increased, with law enforcement and personal protection detail now surrounding him at all times. His public appearances, which were a way of connecting with the Canadian people, were severely limited. He was advised to avoid appearing in public places where his whereabouts could be easily tracked, and he was instructed to steer clear of revealing his location in real time.
To flying those now familiar flags, this Prime Minister has often elicited strong feelings among Canadians. In resignation, as in office, opinions full of passions Monday.
Joy, and just can't wait till it's all over, to be honest.
I'm so happy. For the last 9 years, I cannot recall he did anything good for the country.
Get rid of Trudeau, get rid of the Liberals, and we'll be good.
A celebration across the prairies was almost always a given. At the best of times, Liberal support here can be hard to find.
I'm a Western Canadian. I've always hated Justin Trudeau. I've hated the name.
But even in Trudeau's own Montreal riding, voters appear to agree.
It doesn't do nothing for the Canada. It's better if he run away.
At the heart of this growing tension was the rise of populism, which has become a powerful force in politics worldwide. Populist movements often thrive on simplifications of complex issues, feeding on the frustrations of ordinary people who feel left behind by traditional politicians. For Trudeau, this populist wave translated into harsh critiques of his policies, especially those surrounding climate change, vaccine mandates, and the carbon tax. These policies, once championed as forward-thinking and progressive, became flashpoints for populist backlash. The populist narrative painted Trudeau as an out-of-touch elite, disconnected from the struggles of everyday Canadians. Social media, particularly platforms like X, played an undeniable role in amplifying negative rhetoric and violent threats. These platforms, designed to allow rapid sharing of ideas and information, often become breeding grounds for the spread of hostile narratives. In the case of Trudeau, X was flooded with posts targeting him directly, many containing graphic threats and inflammatory language. The anonymity provided by these platforms gave people a shield behind which they could freely express hostility without facing immediate consequences. The challenge of moderating such content became a central issue. as platforms struggled to balance the principles of free speech with the need to prevent harm. During Trudeau's tenure, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, he had already faced protests that hinted at the more severe challenges ahead. The Freedom Convoy protests, which saw truckers and other groups protesting against vaccine mandates and lockdown measures, were one of the most visible examples of this. While the protests were largely peaceful, they were also marked by confrontations and, at times, violent imagery directed at Trudeau. Protesters carried signs that depicted him in threatening ways, some even referencing violence. His resignation had likely been partially motivated by a desire to step back, take stock of his leadership, and consider his future path free from the pressures of office. Instead, his post-resignation period is a far cry from the peaceful period of introspection he had likely envisioned. The threats against Justin Trudeau represent not only a personal challenge for the former Prime Minister, but also a reminder of the fragility of democratic institutions in Canada. Democracy relies on the stability and safety of its leaders, as well as the integrity of the institutions that govern the country. When political leaders become targets of violence or intimidation, it undermines public trust in these institutions and sends a dangerous message about the limits of political engagement. The very foundation of democracy is built on the principle that leaders can make decisions and carry out their duties without fear for their lives or personal safety. However, when threats of violence become commonplace, as they have in Trudeau's case, it threatens the ability of leaders to function effectively and creates a chilling effect on democratic participation. Over recent years, the tone of public debate has increasingly shifted toward hostility and extremism, with social media platforms amplifying these voices. The spread of misinformation, coupled with a growing sense of division, has contributed to an environment where discourse is often defined by vitriol and aggression, rather than reasoned debate and respectful disagreement. In this environment, political leaders like Trudeau become targets of not only criticism, but also personal attacks, often fueled by lies or exaggerated claims. This climate of hostility undermines the very essence of democratic exchange, which depends on civility, mutual respect, and the ability to engage in dialogue across ideological divides. If democracy is to thrive, there must be a concerted effort to restore civility to political discourse. While political leaders must be held accountable for their actions, it is equally important that criticism remains respectful and focused on policies rather than devolving into personal attacks or threats of violence. Looking ahead, the events surrounding Trudeau's resignation and the threats that have followed could very well serve as a turning point in both his future and the future of Canadian politics and beyond. For Trudeau, this might begin a new phase in his life, whether that's retreating from the public sphere or continuing to advocate for the values he has long championed. For the broader political landscape, it could be the catalyst for necessary conversations about the direction of democracy and how we safeguard both our leaders and the integrity of political processes. It's a moment that calls for reflection on the state of global politics and a chance for all of us to play a part in shaping a future where respect and civility are restored to the public sphere. What do you think? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.